So we are at the 8th 2018 Congress and just coming out at the launch of the expert consensus statement on the science of HIV in the context of criminal law. Can you please help us to understand that how this statement and the work around working with scientists really help the decriminalization effort and also bringing just use of criminal law closer to the elimination of HIV?
Well, the first point one must make is that today's statement is enormously important. It's a statement signed by 20 of the world's foremost HIV scientists. And the points it makes are very important. That HIV is very difficult to transmit, even when a condom is not used, even when the person with HIV doesn't have an undetectable viral load, all the more so when there's an undetectable viral load, all the more so when a condom is used. So the statement really underscores the difficulty of transmitting HIV. Why is it important? It's important because we've known this for many, many years. Since the late 1980s, there were massive studies in the San Francisco General Hospital which showed us how difficult it is to pass HIV from me who's living with HIV to you who doesn't have it. And yet, in the nearly 30 years since those studies have appeared, the lesson hasn't been absorbed, the lesson hasn't been got over, the penny hasn't dropped. And I'll come back in a moment to why it hasn't. But for that reason, for the world's most prominent HIV scientists, supported, I may say, by 70 more who've signed on to their statement, to be saying this. And the reason it's important is twofold. The first is that the major problem we have dealt with in this epidemic started, of course, with the fact that HIV was fatal. And I faced death from it myself. I was very sick in 1997. But that problem was dealt with for many people, for more than half of the people in the world living with HIV, with medication, with the medications I'm taking, antiretroviral medication. But the second problem has proved to be one that science and medicine and medical treatment and expertise hasn't been able to deal with. That's the problem of stigma. Stigma, 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 stigma. We treat people like me who are living with HIV as though they're radioactive, as though spitting can transmit HIV, as though a single instance of heterosexual intercourse or even of anal intercourse, which is much more risky than opposite sex partner intercourse, can transmit HIV when we know it cannot. So that stigma is the reason behind the criminal laws. And we hope that this statement, this authoritative scientific position, like when Galileo said, the earth moves around the sun does not move around the earth, that firm scientific statement can actually start to attack the stigma. And it's the stigma that has led to the enactment in most of the states of the United States of terrible laws that make it. There's one man whom we met at the press conference this afternoon, at the International AIDS Conference here in Amsterdam this afternoon, who's in prison in Idaho in the United States for 30 years, 2 successive sentences of 15 years each. He's been in prison for 10 years. He's got to face another 20 years in prison for not telling a sexual partner that he had HIV. He wore a condom. He was taking medication. He could never transmit anything. He has been sentenced to 30 years for not telling about his HIV. So we hope that this kind of bizarre, grotesque, irrational outcome can now start to be addressed through today's wonderful statement from these scientists.
Justice Cameron, can you also talk about a little bit how is it problematic that viral law very often for those who are on treatment is being used by the defense in terms of exposure and in terms of transmission. How it can be actually problematic to rely on the viral load status for those who are not on treatment.
Let's start with the good news. The good news is that I'm viral load undetectable. You can prick my finger, you cannot find HIV in my blood, in my semen, in my saliva. You cannot find it. I've been taking HIV medications for nearly 21 years. And that's the good news. Great for me. Well, Edwin Cameron, a white male from South Africa, gay white male from South Africa, he's undetectable, great. But it's not great for everyone, because the most vulnerable people in this epidemic aren't people like me. I've got a position as a judge, I've got medical insurance as a judge, I've got income as a judge, I go home to a warm house every night. The most vulnerable people are sex workers, the most vulnerable people are marginalized groups in Africa and South Asia and in Central and South America, who are still persecuted for being sex workers or LGBTI people. Women are a vulnerable group in the epidemic, and disproportionately the vulnerable, injecting drug users, prisoners, incarcerated populations do not have access to antiretroviral treatment. So I've got a doctor. The doctor measures my blood and takes tests. I get a reminder from my medical insurance every 3 months, unnecessarily so. Don't need a reminder every 3 months once you're on stable antiretroviral medication. Not everyone does. So to elevate this, what we call U versus U equals U, undetectable means untransmittable, to a new standard is unacceptable. We must go back to the sources of the stigma, which is racial ignorance, gender inequality, the persecution of sex workers, the persecution of injecting drug users, the ignorance about marginalized populations like prisoners. We've got to go back to those drivers, those what we call vectors of the epidemic, and tackle those. Now, even if you're not on antiretroviral medication, it is still irrational to target you with an HIV specific statute. It is wrong, it is unjust. And we made a statement about 5 years ago on behalf of UNAIDS and the UN, which said that there are a very small category of cases. If I pick up this cup and I really intend to hurt you and I bash it against your head, I've committed a criminal act. If I use my HIV with deliberate intent to injure you, and I do injure you, then of course there's a case. Those cases are so rare. Most cases are used against people with HIV who either didn't know they had HIV or who could not transmit it, who did not transmit it, who had undetectable viral loads, who had low viral loads. So we now know the science of HIV is very important, which is that once you get HIV, I got HIV in Easter 1985, 33 years ago. And after that, for a very short time, for a few months or weeks, I was highly infectious because the virus took over my body, my glands swelled. I remember it actually. I didn't feel well. I had flu that whole winter after Easter in the southern winter. I was very infectious. But then your body gets to grips with the HIV virus, and most people, even without medication, aren't infectious. Or there's a very small chance of infection. So we need to go back to that science. The trouble with these criminal laws is not that a small percentage of us are undetectable, and hurrah for us, but we've got no reason to celebrate or to create a new category of touchables and untouchables. There's no basis for us to create a new category of the unstigmatized and the stigmatized. This whole epidemic for 37 years has been about the stigmatized, the marginalized, the vulnerable, the excluded, the branded, the unacceptables. And We must not, with U equals U, create a new category. We must reject that.
And what is your actual vision about the actual elimination of unjust use of criminal laws around the world?
Well, we must start by releasing all people in the United States, in Africa, in Asia, in Eastern Europe, where most prosecutions are now occurring, Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, in the countries of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, where people have been imprisoned, prosecuted and imprisoned, basically for living with HIV. HIV is not a crime. We've got to stop there. The second thing we've got to do is to abolish these statutes. The third thing we've got to do is to tackle the first thing we've got to do, but we've got to do all of these things together, is to tackle the sources of that ignorance and fear and stigma. So our objective is very clear. We've got to abolish all statutes that target people with HIV. And we've got to stop all prosecutions that target people with HIV. And we've got to target instead the underlying ignorance and fear and discrimination that leads to these unjust prosecutions and unjust statutes.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your voice. Thank you.